Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Studies of Religion HSC Masterclass. This session is on Judaism, Religion and Peace. It'll be led by Rabbi Jacqueline Nino from the Emmanuel Synagogue, Wellara, who's with us now. Thank you, Jacqueline. During the presentation, if you have any questions, if you could type them in the Q&A tab, and hopefully Jacqueline will have some time at the end to go through those. Thank you very much, Jacqueline.
Thank you, and thank you everyone who's joined here in real life, and thank you to everyone who will watch a little bit later on. I do have a source sheet for everyone. It's a number of pages long with all the quotes and all the biblical references and all the things that I talk about today. So you don't need to be madly trying to write them all down and remember. The best thing to do, and what I would love you to do, is just kind of be present and listen and make some notes about the things I say about them. But don't worry, because along with the video and along with, for all those people who are joining in real life, you will definitely receive that source sheet later, and you can refer to it at any time for the quotes. And if you want to be in touch with me directly about anything or any questions you have, please feel free to do so. I am going to talk about Judaism and peace from a number of different perspectives, and I want to start. Oh, I just wanted to say, as well, as David mentioned, I'm very happy to answer questions along the way or at the end. So if you do have a question, just put it in the Q&A, and if I see it along the way and I can answer it as I'm going, I will. And if there are any that we don't get to, we can reply to them later on. So let's go. Religion, Judaism and peace. So I think the very first thing to talk about is the fact that the word for peace, shalom, also has a connotation of wholeness and oneness. So peace is more in Judaism than an absence of war. It's a coming together and a union of a certain way of being in the world. And it's not just for individuals, it's for countries, it's for nations. The idea is that we will have Shalom, which is more than just not war, but it will be a real peace amongst all people. And when Jewish people greet one another, the word for hello is shalom. The word for goodbye is shalom. And on the Sabbath, we say to people, Shabbat Shalom, may you have a Sabbath of peace. So in our daily interactions, in every interaction with another person, the one thing, of all the things we could wish people, we wish each other peace. And that, I think, also, again, is not just for individuals. It's about a peace that we hope will descend, and a oneness that we hope will descend on the entire world. And even when we say to people, when we say today, we sort of say, hi, how are you? In Hebrew, when you say, how are you? You ask, ma shlomcha or ma shlomech, which means, how is your peacefulness? How is your sense of peace? So again, you can hear shalom, shlomcha, shlomech, like the same root word is used when we ask someone how they are. We're not just asking about their physical well-being, we're asking about their spiritual sense of self as well. And when we respond to the greeting of, hello, how are you? Like shalom aleichem, and you say alechem shalom in response. So you wish that peace back to the person who's spoken with you. So peace is kind of a central part of Hebrew dialogue and speech and the way that we interact with one another on every single level. And if you think about the city of Jerusalem, which according to Jewish tradition is one of the most important and sacred places, in Hebrew the word is Yerushalayim, which has the root word again, shalom, of peace or wholeness or oneness. And that's what we want for that ancient city as well as for all of us. So when we talk about peace, what are we talking about? Like what do we imagine, and how do we see that? First, we're going to look for nations and for peoples. And then we're going to look at personal peace and that sense of peace for individuals. So first of all, for nations, where do we get the idea of what that is going to be like, that peace that will descend onto the world? And for that, mostly we go to the prophets. And there's the very, very famous vision from the prophet Isaiah, which says, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and they won't study war anymore." So there's this vision of the idea that all the weapons will be used for agriculture, for cultivating, and everything, all that metal will be bent and reshaped, and we will never have to use it for war again. And there's a really amazing Israeli Hebrew poet. His name is Yehuda Amichai, and he wrote a poem based on that passage from the Bible. And I've included it in your quotes because I think for me, it's a very powerful sort of next step after that vision from Isaiah. And he says, it's an untitled poem, and he says, "Don't stop. After beating the swords into plowshares, don't stop. Go on beating and make musical instruments out of them. And then whoever wants to make war again will have to turn them into plowshares first." So I love that notion and that idea that just beating, making that one step of beating them into plowshares, that's not enough. You have to go even further and create something that's going to bring music and beauty into the world, as a juxtaposition to the war and the struggle. So he, Yehuda Amichai, like I said, he's in the notes. He's written some beautiful, beautiful poetry, and he was one of Israel's greatest peace poets. So don't just look at that one. You can look at lots and lots of his poetry if you want to add some extra bits in. And one of the things about him is he often takes those biblical passages and the very famous quotes from the Bible and turns them around and plays with them a little bit. So he's not just talking about peace, but he's using and grounding it in biblical passages. So we have the vision of no more weapons of war. And then we have the other image from Isaiah, which is very famous. The wolf will lie with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, and the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a child will lead them. So they take all the different creatures that are almost by nature in opposition with each other, and the peace will mean not just peace among human beings, but it will be a peacefulness that will happen and descend on the entire world. All these animals who instinctively are in conflict with one another, they'll lie down together, and there'll be peace and harmony. And often we talk about this time as being like Gan Eden, which means the Garden of Eden. So that original creation of a human being in that garden paradise, that's what we aim to return to. And sometimes when, which is a completely different topic, and I'm not going to go there, but sometimes when Jews talk about the afterlife, or what happens when you die, we don't talk about paradise, we talk about a return to the Garden of Eden. So heaven is a return to that peacefulness and that oneness of all creatures, all humanity, all beings. Now, Isaac Luria, who is a famous Kabbalist, a mystic, a Jewish mystic, talked about the creation of the world. And in his understanding of how the world was created, there was peace, harmony, everything was beautiful all through the universe. But God wanted to create the world, so they said God filled everything. And God had to make space for the world, so God contracted a little bit and put a little bit of God's essence into a container, and that made room for the world to be created. And God created that world, but also by doing that allowed sort of badness or evil to infiltrate into the world. So the world is not perfect. And they say that the container that was holding God shattered. Not all of God, just that little part, it shattered. And little sparks were sent all over the world and hidden. And every time we do something that brings about peace, that creates harmony, that is bringing goodness into the world, one of those sparks comes back together. And if we all work together, according to Isaac Luria, to tikkun olam, to repair or heal the world by gathering all those sparks together through our actions and through our deeds, then peace and harmony and goodness will come to the world. So Jewish visions of that end of time where the wolf lies with the lamb, where the swords are beaten into plowshares, it's not something that will just happen by us sitting around and waiting for it. We are active participants in bringing that peace into the world. And there's a famous passage from Psalms that says we need to seek peace and pursue it. And they said, why would it say the double? Like, surely just seek peace or pursue peace. Like, one of those would be enough. But they put both because they say we might be tempted to just seek peace amongst ourselves, amongst the people around us, you know, the ones that we really care about the most. But they say that it adds and pursue it to remind us that peace is not peace unless everyone has it. So a little corner of the world being peaceful, that's very nice, but it's not enough. And we have to go out and do the work to make it happen, which is part of what that pursuing peace is about. Lots of other commandments in the Torah, almost none of them have that level of activity required and involved. You know, we do this and we do that, but we not only wait for it to happen, we have to go out and find it. We have to make it happen. We have to be the impetus and the cause for peace in the world. It's not enough just to sit around. And there's a wonderful passage again from the prophet Isaiah that we read on Yom Kippur, on the holiest day of the year. We read this passage that and Jews are in synagogue that day. They're fasting, you know, we're doing all the right things, praying and fasting. And we read a passage from Isaiah that says, your prayers and your fasting mean nothing to me if there are poor, if there are people suffering, if there is struggle in your world. So God's kind of saying through the prophet, it's very nice that you're all, you know, praying and doing all these very outwardly pious things, but you obviously are not learning anything if you're not then going out and making the world a better place and healing the world and doing the actions of pursuing and creating peace for other people and for yourselves. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of the vision of peace is the Shabbat, the Sabbath. So the Jewish Sabbath begins on Friday night, it ends on Saturday night, and it's supposed to be a taste of that peaceful, harmonious world. So on the Shabbat, we step back from the world. We stop intervening and trying to dominate the world and everything around us. We don't work, we rest, we enjoy, we relax, we take time, and we step back from all the interventions that we have in the world as human beings. So for 24 hours, 25 hours, we are living in harmony with the world, with nature, with ourselves. And so that, they say, is a taste of what it will be like, that vision of the future when it's always Shabbat, when it's always that time of rest and peace and relaxation. And having that Shabbat every week is preparation for that. And I've put in a quote from Abraham Joshua Heschel, who wrote an amazing book called The Sabbath. And I'm going to just read it out, but it will be in your set of quotes. As he writes, Shabbat comes with its own holiness. We enter not simply a day, but an atmosphere. He says, my father cites the Zohar. The Shabbat is the name of God. We are within the Shabbat rather than the Shabbat being in us. The goal is to create the Shabbat as a foretaste of paradise. The Shabbat is a metaphor for paradise and a testimony to God's presence in our prayers. We anticipate a messianic era that will be a Shabbat, and every Shabbat prepares us for that experience. He says, unless one learns how to relish the taste of the Shabbat, one will be unable to enjoy the taste of eternity in the world to come. So this idea that the whole week rotates around the Shabbat, and the Shabbat is a taste of what that peaceful, harmonious paradise on earth will be like. But again, it doesn't just happen. We have to work to make it happen, in the same way as we have to work to make the Shabbat or the Sabbath happen. So now I want to go on to the Torah, which is Judaism's sort of central document. It's the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And that is sort of our contract with God. This is where God tells us what God wants from us, and this is what we read to understand what we should be pursuing in the world. And we start in the Torah with the creation of human beings, and there was one human being created. Now, interestingly, in our world of gender diversity, according to the Torah, one human being was male and female. So it says male and female, God created them. So that first human being had aspects of both. All of it is divine. And then when God created Eve for Adam, a partner, God split the first person in half, because the word for rib and the word for side are the same. And we had male and female. So we separated the two. But the rabbis say, if God was going to create a partner for Adam, why didn't God just create 2 human beings to start with? God's God, surely God could have just gotten onto the job. And they answer saying it's really important that we all descend from the same one person, which shows us that no one is better than anyone else. No one is more worthy, more deserving, has greater ancestry, has a better connection. All of us came from a single source. And they say that is what will bring about peace in the world, is that we acknowledge that we all come from that single one human being and that one source, and that we don't imagine or believe that any one of us is any better than anybody else. But then God had to give the Jewish people the Torah, this document by which we were going to live our lives. And when did God give it to us? So we're told that they were a disparate group of people. And then they arrived at the foot of Mount Sinai, and it does this weird grammatical thing in the Hebrew, and instead of saying they camped at Mount Sinai, it says he camped at Mount Sinai, the singular male. So they said, well, there were thousands of people. Why is it in the singular? And they answer, because in that moment, all of the people were as one. There was a peacefulness and a connection to each other that meant that they were ready to receive the Torah. And they were only ready to hear that Torah message when we were united and when we had peace amongst ourselves. And they talk about in the Midrash, the moment of receiving the Torah, they say there was a pure silence, like no bird made a noise, no baby made a sound, there was no wind, nothing. It was this pure silence. And in that moment, we heard the voice of God beginning to teach us about how to be in the world. And so that pure moment of peacefulness only came about because the people were united in harmony and as one. And the I guess theology behind that is that the Torah is supposed to inspire us to continue to keep that peace amongst people. They say that the Torah's ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. They say everything that was written in the Torah is written for the sake of peace. So the Torah is all about creating peace. And when we go to interpret it, because we know any document, any thing that we read has lots of different interpretations, different ways of looking at it or understanding it. And the Torah is the same. So they say every time we go to interpret the Torah, we have to do it in a way which brings about peace. If we're not reading the Torah in a way that makes peace in the world, then we're reading it wrong, and we have to go back and do it again. So over and over and over is reinforced. These texts, these laws, these rules, these traditions are all about making peace between nations, between people, and also even within our own selves, which we'll get to a little bit later. Although, having said that, the Torah does talk about war. So there is a notion that sometimes war is necessary. There are two different wars which are spoken about in the Torah. One is what later came to be called a commanded war, or a war of mitzvah. Milchemet means war, mitzvah, which means a commanded war. So in the Torah, there are groups of people like the Amalekites, for example, who attacked the Jewish people and were thought, according to the tradition, to have not played fair in war. And so we're supposed to go to war against the Amalekites, and that's a war commanded by God. But people have said, the Jewish commentators, and there's great agreement that none of those wars exist anymore. Like the peoples about which those Torah wars were talking no longer exist. So there is no such thing today as a war that's commanded by God, or a war that comes from in order to shatter the peace, that we would be commanded to go out and to fight any kind of war. So the second category of war is a necessary or a permitted war. And at the time they were working out what that meant, there was a group called the Sanhedrin. It was a group of rabbis who made rules and made laws, and you had to go to them to find out whether a war would be correct or not. Now we are at the point where we say the only war is a war which is a defensive war. So a preemptive attack is okay if your peace is being threatened, but any war that is an aggressive war for no reason is not an acceptable war in Judaism. So defensive war, the only reason to break that peace is if you are about to be attacked and you have no choice. The Torah says before you go to war, you have to offer terms of peace. You have to make sure that you say to people and give them every opportunity you possibly can to make peace with the aggressor. You don't want to go to war. Everything has to be done to avoid war. If it turns out that you haven't been able to make that peace, no matter how many times you have tried, then if you go to war, you can only surround a city, for example, according to the Jewish rules, on 3 sides, because you have to enable anyone who wants to flee and not fight in the war or be part of the war to be able to leave. So again, there's a constant trying very hard to avoid war, to maintain that sense of peace, and to allow people who are not participating in the war, don't want to be part of the war, to be able to escape from the situation. The temple, the holiest site in Judaism, was built in Jerusalem, and King David had the vision to build the temple, and God said to him, no, sorry, mate, you are not going to be the one to build the temple, because you have fought many, many wars. And not to say that those wars weren't necessary or whatever, but you are a man of war, and I don't want a man of war to build the holiest site to the Jewish people. So his son Solomon, which is Shlomo in Hebrew, which has the same root as the word peace, he was the one who built the temple, and he was not permitted to use any metal in the construction, even in the tools, because they are weapons of war. Like metal is used to make weapons, and that is not considered a part of the peacefulness of the temple, and what the message that God wanted to send into the world through the building of this place of holiness. So the most sacred site in Judaism should have nothing to do with war and everything to do with peace. So when we talk about how we need to behave, like when we talk about seeking peace and pursuing it, what does that mean? How does a Jewish person, go out and seek or pursue peace? So the person who is most often raised when we talk about this is Aaron, Moses' brother Aaron. So there is a famous passage that says, they say, be like the disciples of Aaron, seeking peace and pursuing it. They say, seek peace in your place, pursue it somewhere else. So like I said before, not enough to have peace just for you or your family or your neighborhood or your city or your country. We need to be actively working on that for the whole world. There's a great story which says that the way Aaron used to make peace, and again, this is a legend, it's not anywhere in the sacred writings, was that he would go to one, if two people were fighting, he would go to one and say, that person over there really is sorry and they want to make peace. And then he'd go to the other one and say, that person over there, he really wants to make peace and he's feeling very sorry. And he would bring the two people together and they would make peace between them. There was a rabbi who said he tried Aaron's method and it didn't work very well. So he doesn't recommend that anyone put that into practice. But Aaron is seen as the kind of ultimate archetypal peacemaker, and that he was constantly trying to bring people together and resolve conflict, mostly amongst individuals and groups of people. There are two famous rabbis in the Talmud who were always disagreeing about the principles of Judaism and rulings and law, but they said that they both respected each other as rabbis and as people, and they only ever argued about the principle and not denigrating or saying bad things about the person. So again, that peace amongst people needs to stay even when you're disagreeing about an issue. That's fine. That's part of learning and debate and discussion. All those things are good as long as you continue to respect and honor the other person that you're discussing with. In a really interesting passage, one of the rabbis in Pirkei Avot, which is a Jewish text called the Ethics of the Fathers, he said, the world stands on three things: truth, justice, and peace. I'm sure that's where Superman got it from, but there you go. Truth, justice, and peace. So then there's another legend that connects with that says when God was creating the world, there were, sorry, I just need to make sure I get exactly the right people, that truth and justice and hold on, where do I find it? I'm just looking for the quote. Here it is. That kindness and justice, that's right, kindness and justice went to God and said, create human beings, because kindness and justice will be something that they bring into the world. And then truth and peace said, don't create human beings because they will bring lies and conflict. And what God did was pushed truth to the side and created human beings. So the question is, or they sort of say, justice and true justice and peace often can't exist together, because sometimes you have to sacrifice one for the sake of the other, and always peace should rule. So even truth, sometimes you can deviate from the truth in order to bring about peace, which is kind of what Aaron did with his little, shuttle diplomacy there. But also they bring an example of God doing this. So they said Sarah and Abraham, remember from the Bible, they're very old, they don't have children, and God says to Sarah, you're going to have a child. And according to the Torah, Sarah laughs and says, how am I going to have a child? My husband is really, really old. And then Abraham is told, and Abraham says to God, what did Sarah say? And God says, Sarah said, how are we going to have a child when we are so old? So rather than putting the blame on old Abraham, God kind of changes the truth a little bit and makes it we being old, so includes Sarah in it to protect Abraham's feelings. So even God tells little white lies to protect people's feelings and to maintain peace between a husband and a wife, between Sarah and Abraham. And there is a principle in Judaism called Shalom Bayit, which means peace in the home. And we do everything we can to maintain that peace in the home. And if that sometimes means deviating a little bit from the truth in order to maintain peace, that's okay. But there's a caveat. You can't deviate from the truth if that deviation is going to cause harm. So you need to be truthful, but if it's not going to cause any harm, it's not going to change anything, but it will protect someone's feelings, peace overrides truth. And it's kind of interesting when you think about the truth and reconciliation movements, that they say that peace can't be brought about between groups of people who have been an oppressed and an oppressor until truth is told. But Judaism would say, tell truth for the sake of peace and for the sake of reconciliation, absolutely 100%. But sometimes we can move away from truth, and sometimes we can move away from strict justice as well. Sometimes strict justice doesn't bring about peace, and in those times, maybe we have to put some of those things aside in order to get the ultimate aim of peace between people. There's another quote which is in your set of quotes. It says, the one who establishes peace between two people, between husband and wife, between two cities, two nations, two families, or two governments, no harm will come to them. So great is that pursuit of peace and working on creating peace for other people. So great is that sense of peace that you know, all these other things will come to you. There was a question about where the quote sheet is. I've purposely not given it to you now so that you don't spend the time reading the quotes and not listening to me. So the quotes will be provided to you, I promise. And there's, I think, 7 or 8 pages of them. So lots of quotes for you to use, and they will be coming to you, I promise. The last thing I'm going to say, I think, about this particular section is that peace is not just about making peace with the people you like and your family and your friends. There's a quote from the Mishnah that says, who is a hero? A hero is not someone who defeats his enemies, but one who turns their enemies into friends. And so that is constantly our aim. And the Torah is very, very clear that you need to do good things. You need to be the person seeking out to do good in the world, not just for the people you like and not just for the people who are like you, but for everyone. And they bring an example of, you know, if your enemy's ox has fallen over in the street, you have to help them to lift the ox up. Even though it's your enemy, even though it's someone you don't like, you may have all kinds of issues with them, you help them in that moment when they need help. And perhaps the hope is that you will bring about peace through those actions and through those interactions. And so it's not just about making peace with the people you care about, it's about making peace with the people who you struggle with. So I want to talk a bit about Jewish prayer and peace. So in the heart of every single Jewish prayer service are prayers asking for peace. And remember, I said before that it's not about bringing peace through our prayers. Like, we don't believe that if we pray to God, suddenly this peace will descend from the heavens. It's all about us using the words of prayer to direct our intentions, to make sure we understand what God wants from us, what we should be pursuing, and then how we can go out in the world and make that happen as individuals and as people. So how do we make sure that that's always in our mind? We do that through the words of prayer. And we also ask for God's assistance in creating that peace in the world for us. The central prayer of Judaism in every single service asks for peace and blessing and loving kindness. A number of the prayers in a traditional prayer book will ask for all of those things for Israel, God's people. It will say for your people Israel, or for the people Israel. And when they talk about Israel, they're not talking about the country Israel. They're talking about the Jewish people, the people Israel. So the Jewish people with whom God, we understand, has a connection, but many reform prayer books and will add for peace for your people Israel and all people. So that's one of the differences between Orthodox prayer books and Reformed prayer books, is that they will be more universal in their requests of God. But remembering Jewish theology says peace needs to come for everyone, not just for us. So in making that plea, the Orthodox are kind of by default including other people, but Reformed Jews will make it explicit. They'll say, we want peace not just for ourselves, but for all the world. At the end of every service, there is a prayer, one line, Oseh Shalom b'momav hu yaseh Shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen, which means, may the God who makes peace in the heavens make peace happen on earth for us. And then we add in, the Reform add in, and for all human beings or all creatures or all people. There is a prayer called the Hashkey Venul prayer. I've put the text here, which again we say in the evening at night time, which was considered a very frightening time for people, asking that we be wrapped in peace, that a shelter of peace come upon us as people and as our country, as our nation, as the world. The final quote is the priestly blessing, which is used in Christian communities, in Jewish communities. It comes from the Torah. Again, it's asking that God bless and protect, God's face shine on us and be gracious to us, God's face be lifted towards us and bring us peace. But again, that's a wholeness, a feeling of oneness, not just for ourselves, but for the world and for all humanity. There's a beautiful quote I've put from Abraham Joshua Heschel, which I think is really important when we're thinking about prayer and the efficacy of prayer. He says, prayer cannot bring water to parched fields or mend a broken bridge or rebuild a ruined city, but prayer can water an arid soul, mend a broken heart, and rebuild a weakened will. So again, that prayer for peace, just the act of praying can bring about an inner peace for us and for human beings, right? It might not fix the bridge or stop the drought, but it can help give us the courage and the strength to face whatever challenges are happening in our lives and in the world. I've also put in here a prayer for Israel, the country. I know that when we talk about Judaism and peace, Israel often comes up. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I think it's important to know that every service we say a prayer for Australia, and we also say a prayer for Israel. And again, the Israel prayer is all centered around peace. So I've included one in the readings for all of you to just see an example. I think I want to talk just 2 minutes about Israel and peace, because I think it's important. Israel's Declaration of Independence, so in their founding as a modern nation state, it says this: we extend our hand to all neighboring states and their people in an offer of peace and good neighborliness, and appeal to them to establish bonds of cooperation with the sovereign Jewish people settled in its own land. The state of Israel is prepared to do its share in common effort for the advancement of the entire Middle East. And so right in its Declaration of Independence is a hope and a prayer and a wish for peace. It's explicit, and again, exactly like the Torah tells us, we reach out our hand in peace and friendship first. We try that as much as we possibly can before we revert to any kind of conflict or war. I've put in a couple of quotes from Yitzhak Rabbin, who was an Israeli prime minister, but also a peacemaker. He was assassinated by a Jewish person who didn't agree with his making peace with the countries around us. But he had some beautiful, beautiful quotes. He shook hands with Yasser Arafat on the White House lawn. Like, he did everything he could to try and bring about peace. Even many people in Israel thought to the detriment Israel's well-being, because peace was his main ideal. And some beautiful quotes he had, and one he said, which I think is really powerful, is that peace is not made with friends, peace is made with enemies. So he's saying, in order to create peace, you need to sit together, you need to talk, you need to have a dialogue, you need to have a conversation, and you need to reach out. And that's very much what he did. So now I'm going to move on, just in the last little bit of time that we have, to talk about inner peace for us as individuals and as human beings. There's some beautiful quotes I've also included from a man called Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. He was one of the great Hasidic rabbis. So if you're looking at Hasidism as well, might be a nice way to connect them together. He had a very particular spiritual practice. He felt that in order to find the inner peace that we need, we have to go outside. We have to go and be among nature. And he said his prayer was, grant me the ability to be alone. May it be my custom to go outdoors each day among the trees and grasses, among all growing things, and may I be alone there and enter into prayer. So he believed that the world around us, nature, connecting with that sense of oneness, of humanity, of living beings, of the grass. He said, the grass has a song. Every blade of grass has a song, and we need to sit there and listen to it. And if we do, it will feed our souls and bring us peace. So part of finding that sense of peace is connecting with the world around us, connecting with nature. He believed that very, very strongly. And one of my favorite quotes from him is, find that's not the one. There is another couple of quotes there about, finding space for yourself and time for yourself. And that's how you will find inner peace. You need to have those moments of seclusion. But he said, if you never want to see the face of hell, when you come home from work every night, dance in your kitchen. And if you are worried about waking up your family, just take off your shoes. So for him, finding joy and finding beauty in moments was really, really important. And in Jewish daily prayer, gratitude is a major theme. So Jewish prayer is about stopping and being grateful for what we see around us and what we have. And that's part of finding inner peace. They say, there's a quote, who is rich? The one who is happy with what they have. And sometimes we forget what we have, and we're constantly looking around, searching everywhere else, trying to get it from other places and acquire more things. And we look on TikTok and we look on Instagram and we look on all these other places, and everyone else's life seems to be so much better than ours, and we forget to stop and be grateful for what we have, rather than for longing for what we don't, or trying to live in other people's shoes. And one of the great rabbis said that when we want something someone else has, or the life that someone else has, we have to remember that we're asking for all of their life, not just the beautiful shiny parts that we see in front of us, but we have to remember that everyone's life is light and shade. We all have broken places. We all have places of pain and suffering and struggle, and sometimes we forget to see that. So very much Jewish prayer for the individual is focused on, first of all, being grateful and recognizing what we have. And even if that's waking up in the morning, the first prayer we say in Judaism in the morning when we wake up is, thank you, God, for me waking up this morning. And thank you for, it's a very practical religion, right? So we say thank you for having the bits of our body that are meant to open, and the bits that are meant to close, and the bits, that not the opposite doesn't happen, that the bits that are supposed to be closed are open, and vice versa. Like, it's this whole prayer, but we say thank you for the blessing of a day, of life, of freedom, like all the things that we might otherwise take for granted. Every time we're about to eat, we say a blessing. So it's a mindfulness practice. We hear a lot about mindfulness in psychology today. Embedded in Jewish prayer is mindfulness. It's stopping, appreciating what you have, and giving thanks for that. at night time, there is a prayer called the Bedtime Shema, and I've put that in for you. Part of that prayer is asking for peace. It's asking for us to be at peace at night when we go to sleep. And that prayer is required of us every night. They say, you should repent the day before your death, and we don't. They say, well, no one knows when that is. So every night we stop, we offer forgiveness to people who may have hurt us, we give thanks for the blessings in our lives, and we ask for a peaceful sleep, a peaceful night, and inner peace within our hearts and our souls. And that sense of lying down, you often hear couples say never go to sleep on an argument. I guess Judaism is trying to say the same thing. It's trying to say every night, just take a moment to stop, reflect on the day, let go of things that are eating you up inside, and just try and be in that place of peace and rest and oneness, and letting go of the hurt and the struggle and the pain. And then I mentioned the Shabbat, the Sabbath, before, but the Sabbath is a very important part of Jewish wellness and inner peace. That this idea that none of us are machines, that we can't work and work and work and work and work and never stop. Like Shabbat is Judaism's answer to work-life balance, or to finding balance in our lives. And it's really, really crucial that we take that time away. We take stock, we pause, we rest, we rejuvenate, we think about things that are not to do with commerce and business and acquisitions and acquiring property and goods, and we take ourselves away from that whole commercial world in which we live most of the time, and we reconnect with ourselves, with our community. We go to synagogue and we connect with our friends. We invite people over for dinner or for lunch. Like, it's a very important time of people to people connection, and also giving ourselves the space to just be. So there's the double importance to feed our souls and to bring us that sense of inner calm and peace. We need relationships. We're meant to be in relationship with each other, and in our crazy world we often don't find time for that. So the Shabbat gives us that moment away from everything in order to just stop and appreciate. And the second thing the Shabbat does for us is to have a space where we can sort of think for ourselves about what is important and recalibrate, reconnect, and then be ready to go back into the working week. There's a few quotes here from Abraham Joshua Heschel, which I understand some of you are studying, some beautiful quotes about the Shabbat. I'll just give you one of them. There is a realm in time where the goal is not to have, but to be, not to own, but to give, not to control, but to share, not to subdue, but to be in accord. Life goes wrong when the control of space, the acquisition of things of space, becomes our sole concern. So it's really important to strive for that harmony with ourselves, with the people around us, and with the natural world. And the Shabbat is kind of the oasis in time every week where we have the opportunity to do that. Two more things, and then please, if there's any questions, I'm really happy to answer them. Judaism says that each person has within them two aspects: a Yetzer Hara, an inclination towards things which are not so good, and the Yetzer HaTov, the inclination towards doing good. And every single person has both those aspects within us. None of us are all good and none of us are all bad. We have these competing interests, and they say that you need both the good and the bad, because the bad are things like ambition and desire. And they say without those things, we wouldn't build houses, we wouldn't create things, we wouldn't have children. Like, all of those things that we need to do need that aspect of ourselves. So when I say bad, it's translated as bad, but it's not bad in the sense of evil. It's just an inclination towards things that are maybe a bit more selfish and a bit more self-centered. And then there's the pull to do good. And that duality is in all of us, and it's constantly pulling us in different directions. And so our goal for our own inner peace is to find a place of harmony between those two inclinations, recognizing both of them are part of who we are. We need both of those pulls in our lives, but what we need to do is to find a place where we can have that peace for ourselves despite those two inclinations together. The last thing I want to talk about is something in Judaism called Mussar, Mussar. It's a movement which is ancient, about self-reflection and self-understanding. And they say if we can create and cultivate these midot, these elements within ourselves, then we will find ourselves living in peace and harmony within ourselves. So it's things like compassion and kindness and giving, and there's a whole series of them. I've put a reference to a book that talks about the Mussar sort of philosophy of life, but also you can look that up. Just Google it, and it will give you a little bit of information about it and about the elements that they say we seek for that inner peace and that sense of wholeness and oneness and self. And part of that is not just looking after ourselves, it also comes from giving back to others. So there is a lot in Judaism as well about the way that we need to reach out to the people around us to help others. And by doing that, we will find a sense of our own inner peace. And that has been borne out over and over again with research of people who volunteer. They're happier people generally, and they feel a sense of purpose, and that gives them a sense of peace. So to reach out and help others and not be concerned only for ourselves. I hope that's given you a lot of things to think about and to talk about. And like I said, if there's any questions, please put them in the chat now. Ask away while you've got your opportunity and your chance, or if there's anything that you wanted me to cover or look at that I haven't talked about yet. It was nice to meet you all, and good luck with the HSC.